I want to turn now to Iraq, where protesters demanding change to their country are paying for it with their lives. CNN has just learned 319 people have been killed since the unrest began on October 1st. And on Saturday, at least 4 protesters were killed. That's according to Iraqi activists who add that security forces push back against the protesters with tear gas and live ammunition. Now, for its part, the government says it only fires when fired upon. Well, the protesters are demanding Iraq's government step down and they want new elections held. The main concerns: corruption at the highest levels, a lack of basic services, and rampant unemployment. CNN's Sam Kiley takes us inside Tahrir Square, ground zero for Iraq's anti-government protests. He speaks with frustrated, angry and scared protesters who say their only demand is to change the corrupt system in the country and to make their voices heard. He joins us now live. Sam, good to have you with us. Bloodbath is one way these protests have been described, given the number of people that have been killed, hundreds over the past month. What's being said about the use of excessive force?
Well, the government are denying that they're using live ammunition at all. I don't know whether they've ever claimed that they've really been fired upon. There's certainly been no evidence of any gunfire coming from the demonstrators' side, certainly not here in Baghdad. There have been more violent demonstrations elsewhere in the country, with an attempt to set fire to the Iranian embassy in Kerbala about 10 days ago. That's very significant because, of course, Kerbala is a Shia town, and it's a predominantly Shia movement, this groundswelling of anger against a government that they say is very strongly over-influenced by neighboring Iran, a Shia nation. Out on the ground, though, I've met Christians, Sunnis, Shia, and many people who simply don't want to be identified by any kind of sectarian label. And that, I think, is a significant change here. A lot of the young people out on the ground are saying that they want an improvement in their lives. Many of them were toddlers when Saddam Hussein was toppled by the US-led invasion. Since then, they've seen nothing but sectarian violence, civil war, a war against the American-led occupation, a war to rid the region of the so-called Islamic State, and they have not seen any benefits flowing, for example, from the massive oil reserves that Iran has. Now, of course, Iran has some catastrophic economic problems that flow largely from the mismanagement of that period under American-led coalition rule and the subsequent economic policies that flowed from that, including, again, creating a large amount of unemployment without creating anything behind it. But nonetheless, the levels of corruption here, Lynda, are extremely high, but people on an everyday basis are absolutely askance at why, for example, there are regular power cuts in a country that produces energy, why there is no clean water for most towns and villages in a country with a massive river that runs through it and, in theory, the energy capacity to clean water. And on top of that, you've got an increasing number of educated people coming out of universities and high schools with no job prospects. And what they're doing is trying to sweep away the predominant sectarian structures of the political parties here that ally themselves either with Sunni, with Shia, or with some more older ideologies, but predominantly fall into a Sunni or Shia set of categories, then allows for the Shia majority to be heavily influenced by Iran. And many Shia are saying they're absolutely fed up with that. They want to have a body politic that reflects the realities of young people today who are rapidly, at least among the demonstrators, moving away from these ultra-religious self-definitions and into a definition, they say, of being Iraqi, of being one nation. But what they don't have, Lynda, is any kind of a clear program for what would happen next if the government did indeed step down or fall. Of course, the Prime Minister here has offered, and his resignation has been accepted, but he's stayed on. Yesterday he offered a degree, but we don't know how much, of unspecified political reforms. But at the same time, the political parties here are in unison with the government in trying to clear away these demonstrations, because if they really take hold any further and force the collapse of a government, they could also force the end of these political parties that have really been dominant since the American-led invasion, and many of them were exiles, were formed as parties in exiles, particularly in places like Iran, but in other countries too, and came back and were imposed or imposed themselves on top of the Iraqis who are living here in the country. So this is partly a youth movement, but also people's parents are now turning up. Parents are bringing their children to these demonstrations. But then right on the front line, there is this very heavy degree of violence. It's not clear that the Iraqi authorities have really got a handle on how to deal with this. They are using live ammunition. A lot of it shot in the air, but every day there is a steady increase in the death toll. A lot of people being killed with tear gas canisters, 40mm projectiles that I've seen a video of one, for example, that hit a young man in the head, and the gas actually spurted out of his skull. It continued to emit gas even though it was embedded in his skull. Clearly that person would not have survived that strike. A lot of people have been killed by these tear gas grenades, as they're called, and a lot of the graffiti reflect that, Linda.
Yeah, absolutely. More than 100 people killed, but many others injured. And we've been seeing this vision of these tuk-tuk drivers going into the protest sites. And it seems perhaps being the unlikely heroes there, trying to help some of those injured.
Well, I think it's a very good reflection of what this revolution, which is what it's being called on the streets, is all about. The tuk-tuk, the three-wheeled motorized tricycle, is the ubiquitous means for the cheapest travel here in the urban areas in Iraq. The people that drive them are among the more humble working class people. A lot of them in this city come from Sadr city, which is a predominantly Shia suburb built under Saddam Hussein. And it's a symbol really of them trying to throw off the shackles, not only of their own poverty, but also of the identification as Shia. They're very keen to just get up to the front line, to transport as many people to the demonstrations, to evacuate wounded. Little tuk-tuks label themselves as ambulances. Some of them even got sirens fixed to them, and they grab people, throw them in the back, and then get them to medical tents and medical treatment, which again are mostly volunteers, mostly medical students, but also qualified doctors too, who are standing back from the areas where the clashes are most intense and getting people treated, getting people evacuated. But there've been the parliament here has confirmed 319 deaths. Human rights groups say there's another 15,000 wounded. So the death toll and the numbers of wounded are climbing all the time. Behind me, I don't know if you can hear, but there's a lot of fireworks going off, and people are shining lasers. From time to time, we also hear gunfire and the use of sound bombs. The Iraqi security forces trying to throw these very, very loud bombs to try and scare people back. But they do resort to live ammunition when they feel most pressurized, Linda.
Very active situation even now, just after 6 p.m. there in Baghdad. Good to have you with us, Sam Kiley. Thanks so much. Well, up next, dire warnings for people in Sydney, Australia, also in Queensland. Unprecedented number of fires already burning in the north could be heading their ways in the coming days. It's not just Australia suffering. We're going to have a live report when we come back.
Firefighters have been battling this blaze for weeks, and at its peak this summer, there were thousands of similar fires in other parts of the country.
And our Ivan Watson shows us the devastation in Indonesia and what it's doing to an endangered species. And Jordan takes back some land it loaned to Israel more than a quarter of a century ago. We'll have a closer look at how relations have soured since then.